Okay, so starting off the Big 12 preview, I'll be giving you guys the team that I'm going to predict to win the Big 12. And this not only is going to be my pick to win the Big 12, but I'll say this. Last year, if the NCAA tournament would have happened, Baylor would have been my pick to win it all. And Scott Drew last year, in my mind, officially cemented himself as not a good coach, as not a great coach, but an elite coach. We all remember what happened when Scott Drew first took over as the head coach of Baylor. If you don't know what happened, look it up. I'm not going to get into it. All I'll say is Baylor has been in a very tough spot since Scott Drew has been the head coach there. And what he's done to turn that program around is absolutely remarkable. And we all remember what the perception of Scott Drew was, right? He was an elite talent acquirer, but not great as an X's and O's guys. But after last season's work, I think Scott Drew has really pronounced that narrative dead. Played two guys in their lineup that one was a D3 transfer in Freddie Gillespie, and another was a Big South transfer in Maceo Teague. That's not exactly the talent pool you'd expect from a team that was consistently top 5 all season long, which is pretty crazy. And instead of sticking to that traditional lineup that Scott Drew usually played with the size and the rebounding we all remember, right? Rico Gathers, Torian Prince, Isaiah Austin, guys like that were always usually the key pieces to why Baylor won. They would just usually out-physical people and out-rebound people. But last year, rather than stick to that traditional size-obsessed formula, Scott Drew used a smaller, more versatile lineup that really was more balanced and very good on both sides of the ball. Jared Butler was phenomenal offensively, and along with him and many other guards, Maceo Teague, Davion Mitchell, Devontae Bandu, they were great on the offensive side of the ball and were really good at just flat out making plays. They were good on the defensive side of the ball last year as well, just a super versatile and balanced team. And I do think Jared Butler, his emergence was a game changer because I thought he could take a step of being a really good player or even the best player on the Baylor team. But the bottom line is this. Jared Butler was one of the best players in the country last year, and he would be on my short list of players this year to possibly win National Player of the Year. I'm that serious. The kid is that good. We didn't think Maceo Teague was going to be that good either, as he was a guy that transferred up from UNC Asheville, right? And we talk a lot about guys having trouble when they transfer up, but honestly, that just didn't apply to Maceo Teague. I'm not trying to overreact, but I do believe that Maceo Teague could be the best transfer I've ever seen that has transferred from like a mid-major school to a high-level school. It was 1 year, but that dude was phenomenal last year, and I'm expecting more things from him this year. I'll repeat that once again. I think Maceo Teague could be the best transfer that I've ever seen from a lower school, like a mid-major, not even like an A10 or a Mountain West, but like a real mid-major, a Big South school, a UNC Asheville, transferred to Baylor, play in the Big 12, and look like he really does belong. So I'm going to give him a lot of credit for that. And he was great last year, and the fact that he's back for Baylor this year is a very big reason why I have them winning the Big 12. Now, my one only other small concern for this Baylor team is that I do think they're really going to miss Freddie Gillespie a lot. This guy was a stud and was one of the more underrated players in the country. He could defend the rim. He could switch defensively, which was huge because last year, that was something their other big man, Tristan Clark, who should be hopefully a little more healthier this year, that's something he couldn't really do coming off of his torn ACL the year prior. Gillespie could really play on the perimeter with dribble handoffs, and when I look at all the center options that Baylor has this year to replace him, they could all rotate playing at the 5, but none of them, I think right now, are top-notch players that could really replace him. Now, they do bring in some big men depth off the bench, including the freshman Dane Danya. He's 6'9". Maybe he could get some time. They also bring in a transfer from UNLV, Jonathan Tatachu. He could really rebound, hopefully playing in the Big 12. He can make a big-time impact. And then I feel like out of all of the newcomers, he could be the most important one because he doesn't measure up to Freddie Gillespie in terms of height and wingspan. But Scott Drew does consider him to be a pretty good athlete, which is evidenced by a 40-inch vertical leap. And of all of the forwards Baylor has, he's the one that I would say most closely mirrors Freddie Gillespie's game, as he could really rebound. Going back to Tristan Clark last year, he was up and down, but mostly down coming off the torn ACL. And to summarize, he's just a very different player from Freddie Gillespie, which I feel like for Baylor could be a little bit of a concern. And he was a dominant force 2 years ago at the start of the season. He got hurt, and he was really their number one option on offense in 20. The good news for Baylor is that they don't lose anyone in the backcourt, and they do add Adam Flagler, who is very talented and was great at Presbyterian. He, like Teague, is a guy that I think is a very good shooter and could make an impact. They also have Matthew Meyer, a guy that has good size. I think he's a possible breakout candidate for this Baylor team this year. He was a key rotation player last year, and I like him a lot. They also have some young guys like Jordan Turner or LJ Creer that could sneak into the rotation as well. And I think you look at Baylor, right? They're a really deep team. And at this point, I think it's established that Scott Drew is a great coach. And at the end of the day, it comes down to how could they replace the center spot and whether they could stay healthy up front. Because otherwise, they do seem like a very safe top 10 team that could even be like a top 5 team in terms of that safeness if you want. Scott Drew has done an unreal job turning around this program. I have Baylor right now as my number 2 team in the country, which is crazy also because last year around this time, I picked them to finish 3rd in the Big 12 and as a consistent top 15 team. But if you remember, they lost Mario Kegler, who was a solid player and was looking to be a key piece, and allowed them to play small the year before in 2018, and he was a pretty valuable piece. And without him, I never thought they'd be as good as other people expected them to be with Kegler, let alone better. And I think a big reason as to why they were better was because of the play of Davian Mitchell on defense and Maceo Teague on offense. That just made them super, super dynamic. Baylor has guards that could score, and one of the most fun players to watch in the country that I haven't even mentioned yet is Mark Vital. He's so dynamic, he's so physical, and someone who everyone wants on their team. This dude is 6'7", and consistently in his first 3 years of college, he's been one of the best rebounders in college basketball. When Tristan Clark had his sophomore year, he was averaging 17, 5, and 2. And there's a lot to think of a guy that once he comes back from a big-time injury, the expectations for many different people could vary, but at the same time, I do think we have to give them some time to recover. Like a guy like Akuk. Hopefully, if you're a Baylor fan, Clark had that time now to recover, and hopefully he should be ready to go and ready to be a much more bigger piece of Baylor this season because there's not much backup depth at center for Baylor. Danger is a good recruit, but playing in the Big 12, there comes a learning curve. They also have Flo Thamba, who played as a freshman, but then kind of fell out of the rotation last year when Baylor really improved. They have JTT, who I mentioned from UNLV, but even though he has potential, that's kind of like throwing a major dart. You hope that could work out. And you could even play real small with Mark Vital at the 5 and Matthew Mayer at the 4, which offensively could be super dynamic. As long as you could rebound, I would actually really like that lineup a lot. And Baylor, being an elite team, is going to depend on the center production. Could Tristan Clark be better? And when he's not in the game, could the backups keep up enough to allow Baylor to be in the game and in the conversation for a number 1 seed? Because as good as Jared Butler and Maceo Teague were last year, Freddie Gillespie, people made the argument, was Baylor's most important player last year. And I'm not going to deny that argument. This guy did so much to help his team out. He was a phenomenal player. He was absolutely relentless on the glass. And Baylor, without him last year, would have been a totally different team. The other guy I wanted to talk about a little bit more is Adam Flagler. I think he's an X factor. I think he's a guy that can make a big-time impact on this Baylor team because he made 108 threes as a freshman. And I know he did it at Presbyterian, but they did win 20 games that year, which never happens. The previous coach the year before went, and one of the main reasons why they brought in a football team apparently was to gain some traction because Presbyterian in college basketball is a tough job. The fact that they won and found a guy like Flagler is huge because he was the best player on a 20-win Big South team. Now, do I think he's going to be all conference at Baylor? No, but if he could be anywhere close to what Maceo Teague was last year, and I think it's not out of the realm of possibilities that he could be, that would be a really good sign and a really good offensive boost for this Baylor team. Also, the Big South has produced some talent that has transferred up and has been a little bit successful. We'll also see how Carleague Jones' career at Louisville turns out. One could argue that last year, everything broke right for Baylor. No one could have predicted that Butler, Teague, Gillespie all could have had the impacts and improvements that they had last year, and that Baylor would have had the fairy tale season that they had. And when you look at Baylor this year, a lot of people are saying regression to the mean, which makes some people think, okay, Baylor isn't winning the Big 12. But with that being said, I still think this team is really consistent. They have one of the highest floors in the country. And most of the cornerstone pieces remains from last year's team, and I do trust Scott Drew to get the job done. I'd be shocked if we weren't talking about Baylor as a top 2 seed by the time of the NCAA tournament, and they are my pick to win the Big 12.